As I look out into this sea of smiling faces, I am filled with a sense of loathing and revulsion. You are not workers. You are a pack of mangy, cud-chewing, ugly goats. Well, you're in for a treat. We have with us today a real man. Behold the glory. That is Homer Simpson.
Hello, and welcome to the Simpsons Countdown, the podcast in which we go back to the beginning and watch all of The Simpsons to trace the creative evolution of the series and count down, finding the exact moment in which it began its downhill journey into irrelevance. I'm Erix Antoine, and this week I'm joined by my good friend Joshua Fein. We'll be discussing Homer Defined, which originally aired on October 17th, 1991. It was written by Howard Gurwitz and directed by Mark Kirkland. In this episode, Homer saves the Springfield nuclear power plant from meltdown by using a counting rhyme to randomly pick the right button. He is honored as a hero and idolized by Lisa, but deep down he knows it was luck. He's eventually found out and enters the annals of the English language as to pull a Homer becomes synonymous with dumb luck. Meanwhile, Milhouse's mother forbids him to play with Bart because she thinks he is a bad influence. There's a bunch of stuff going on in this episode, which features John Lovitz and a cameo by Magic Johnson, which was heavily publicized at the time. After the break, Fein and I are going to break it down. So, without further ado, here we go.
Play.
Bart, my mom won't let me be your friend anymore. That's why you couldn't come to the party.
What's she got against me?
She says you're a bad influence.
Bad influence my butt. How many times have I told you never listen to your mother?
But Bart, she threatened to cut off my allowance.
Whatever she's paying you, I'll double it.
Finally, just a regular kind of funny, classically funny, just sort of standard, laid back, fun Simpsons episode, which is more in line with what people remember when they look back on The Simpsons. When people look back on The Simpsons, they tend not to really remember the more maudlin, earnest, sort of smiles through tears ones. They tend to remember these, which I think this is an episode that's already very much a season 3 episode. What do I mean by that? What I mean by that is the season premiere, the Michael Jackson episode, was actually produced during the second season production run. And When Flanders Failed was also like a leftover script. I don't know if from the production run or whatever, but the first couple of episodes of the third season are sort of like leftovers from the second season production run, or even from the time, maybe they're leftover scripts or whatever it is. But now here's where you start to see that the style is changing. So, we had the Fat Tony episode, and now we have this. And I think there's like a marked difference. I don't know if I'm overstating it because I know where we eventually go, but I mean, I was curious what you thought. Or what your thoughts?
I would agree that there's a marked difference. I was thinking about this before I rewatched the episode today, and you're right. We don't have the melodrama that we had in the first couple seasons. I think if this had been an episode from those first 2 seasons, we would have had much more focus on Homer, wondering if how does he trying to reconcile being a hero, also just finally picking a random button and blithely saving everybody and having to deal with it. That's barely touched on in this episode. I want to point out, interestingly, with this episode, this was written by a freelance writer, and this was the only Simpsons script this guy ever wrote. This guy Howard Gurwitz. He wrote for a lot of other TV, but this episode stands out. I think for that reason, because this guy never wrote another Simpsons episode again. We do have a little bit more of the biting satire with this episode than we'd have in the previous seasons. It already starts off with their commentary on USA Today, where America's number 2 pencil is number 1. And pretty much all the criticism they have about USA Today then, you could port that over to BuzzFeed or any type of internet clickbait today.
Yeah, well, this is the only this is the only paper that tells it like it is, that everything is just fine. Um, that's very satirical, but also to your point about how maybe if this were a first season or even second season episode, first of all, what the focus would be. I guess if the main plot line is that Homer sort of lucks into saving the plant from melting down, and maybe they would focus more on his internal struggle. Like they would take it seriously, is my point, right? Where here, yeah, he feels a little bit embarrassed. You know, he knows that in reality he lucked into it. He's being hailed as a hero, but the episode doesn't take it seriously. That's
You know
what
what
I'm
it would
getting.
look like if it was more melodramatic. It would look like the episode in season 1 where he loses a job and nearly considers committing suicide off a bridge. It would
Yes, exactly.
probably end up looking something like that. You know, after he somehow stumbles in and saves the plant, we go immediately to the B story of Milhouse's mom not wanting Milhouse to be friends with Bart anymore. And we have very little going back to Homer and his struggles of being a hero, except for Lisa admiring him in quiet awe. And it does touch on that through line of Lisa, loving her dad and considering him to be a hero at times, and especially in this era. I thought what was interesting with this episode, because it's talked about in the commentary, is the technical flourishes of this episode in terms of how dramatic the meltdown scenes are with the lighting and the animation. And I remember that standing out. I saw this episode first run. It can be almost downright unsettling at times. The way with the dramatic music that Alf Clausen is, especially when Homer's trying to pick whatever nursery rhyme or whatever naming game to pick the button, going from bubblegum in a dish to eating Monty Mo and all that.
Right, yeah, exactly.
And it's getting more and more dramatic.
Okay, gotta pick a button. No, 1 potato, 2 potato, 3 potato, 4. No, wait, bubblegum in a dish. How many pieces do you want? No.
I also saw this when it aired, and at the time I was in New York still. And they really publicized Magic Johnson's participation in the episode. That he's got a cameo basically, but they really made a big deal out of him being in the episode. And I think that that's something that really gets kicked into high gear. The whole celebrity voice cameos starts to become much more prevalent now than it was. They were more low key, but then, you open your season with Michael Jackson. So now from this point on, they're going to make a big deal out of anybody who comes on, even if it's like, in the case of Magic Johnson, just a very brief cameo.
But yeah, you're right. This is where the show's having its first wave of fandom. And, we've heard previously that, was celebrities doing, cartoon voices was looked down upon. It's like, way back when movie stars, when they go to TV, it's like, oh, the career's on the decline. And yeah, this is when you're getting cultural cachet. This is when you're getting celebrities that want to be on the show. And admittedly, this is more of an example of like, hey, it's X celebrity. Let's all admire see what they have to say versus, especially in these early days, you do have celebrities that play characters. They're not necessarily playing themselves. We get a lot more of that later on in the show.
Yeah.
But occasionally we'll get these cameos we see with Magic Johnson. We'll get it with Sting. Celebrities playing themselves or maybe a parody of themselves. Not necessarily, doing what Dustin Hoffman did as, Mr. Bergstrom, or, what Michael Jackson, even, kind of what Michael Jackson did in his episode, where he was playing, someone who's pretending, who thinks he's Michael Jackson.
And that was a very original way to bring him in. But you're right. I mean, at this point, it still isn't sort of like a celebrity cameo extravaganza. Usually you'll get celebrity cameos, but they'll be like sports figures or pop stars. But if you get like an actor, most of the time the actor will play a character. And so like in this particular case, you have that, and that's the big thing that was publicized. But we've also got John Lovitz in a very funny guest role as Aristotle. what a weird
Just
name.
whatever
Yeah.
stereotypical
Yes.
shipping magnate name you can think of. I also like to think of him as like a Dino De Laurentiis type. And yes, I'm aware that Dino De Laurentiis is Italian. Not only does Lovitz voice that guy, we only again see in the baseball episode, but he also
Yeah.
plays like Mr. Devereaux in the soap opera that's playing before it gets interrupted by the special report from the news.
Yeah, that's great. Like that's very funny. John Lovitz is very funny, and I guess they wouldn't bother really publicizing his participation because it wasn't the first time he was doing it. And just like they didn't tend to like trumpet Phil Hartman whenever he would show up. You know, it was like he'd just be there. So
Right.
he's almost like a what do you call it? Like a featured player at that point.
Yes,
You know,
like a special utility player that they bring in for like certain characters. I think yeah, again from the commentary, the reason they brought Lovitz on, reasons they did bring him on was that Lovitz had the ability to turn emotion right on a dime.
yes, he has that thing, which I think is something that he would do even like on SNL. You know, it's part of his shtick.
Right.
You know, the part where he comes out and it's like as I look at this audience, I am filled with a sense of loathing and revulsion. The way he does that is very funny, but it's part of his shtick. I think that at this time, this is the fall of '91. I think Lovitz and Hartman were at this time they were regulars on SNL. They were in the regular cast, right?
Right.
Right. So it's almost like they were sort of going to SNL to get, they got those guys. They got Hartman, they got Lovitz. And what you were saying about celebrities, that celebrities doing TV, it was sort of a downward thing for them, right? Like back in the 70s, if you've shown up on the Love Boat, your career is over. You know, either your career is just beginning or your career is over. That's what it is if you're on the Love Boat or on Fantasy Island or whatever it is. But I think in this particular case, what ended up happening with The Simpsons is that it sort of became like Saturday Night Live, where like you've made it. You know, if you get asked to guest on The Simpsons, it's the equivalent of being asked to host Saturday Night Live.
Yeah, it's a mark of pride. It's like a badge of honor type thing. And yeah, I would agree. I thought that was excellent what you thought of about with like the celebrities who are actors. They'll typically play around this time. They're going to play characters. You saw it with Danny DeVito. He's not playing himself. He's playing Herb Powell. And but you have people that are not actors. They're going to play themselves or like a form of themselves and make fun of themselves. But yeah, and I remember this with the promos when you had a celebrity. They would advertise that on The Simpsons. It's like special guest star, whomever, and you would watch for that, and that's how you would remember. Oh, that person was in the episode, and you would look out for that. You would look out for that type of thing. On coming up on Thursday nights.
But again, like they would publicize what was the big draw. So that's interesting to consider that John Lovitz was not the big draw, even though John Lovitz was a recognizable comedian from Saturday Night Live. But he's not exactly a marquee name. That's the thing that it's interesting to kind of go back. What the big deal was about this episode was, oh yeah, Magic Johnson he's going to show up in it for a couple of seconds. So that might be funny. He's got like 2 lines or 3 lines. Now, we're talking about how the episode is basically very funny and how the focus shifts into the B story, which is about Bart and Milhouse's friendship. Now, this is a storyline that, here's an example of something that in season 1 or 2 would have probably been handled in much more maudlin fashion, I think, than the way it's handled here, where it's kind of sweet. It's kind of like, Bart and Milhouse are being kept apart because Milhouse's mom thinks that Bart's a bad influence, etc. We all know that Bart, deep down, is really just a good kid. He's just, he's just mischievous or whatever, but he's not bad. He's not a bad person.
Well, it doesn't help when you look at the photos of Bart and Milhouse's relationship. Every photo is involved where it looks like Bart is doing like grievous bodily harm to Milhouse, and they talk about that in the commentary. Like, here's a photo of him burying him in sand. Here's a photo of him nearly sawing him in half. And then when Milhouse's mom allows Bart to be friends again, he gets out the Deadeye BB gun and racks it a few times before going back out outside.
But see, I think that's a great scene. I think the scene where Marge Simpson goes to talk to Milhouse's mom, and they have a nice conversation. And that's a really nicely handled scene that doesn't go too far in the, into the maudlin thing, but it does ground the situation in a relatable concept where, I mean, she brings up the fact that they're very good friends. All they've got is each other. You know, they're all, they're frequently bullied. It's not like either of them are the most popular kids in the school, right? They're frequently bullied. What was it in the Christmas pageant? They're
They
always
both play
sheep.
sheep. Yeah.
Yeah, right. So Marge is genuinely trying to appeal. She's going to say, "Look, I know that Bart's not, I know Bart occasionally is a troublemaker and whatever else, but deep down inside, he is a genuine friend, and Milhouse needs him too.
When they cut away after Marge has that conversation with, I think, Luann is her name. You see Milhouse just stomping his, trying to use the seesaw alone. And you can see how depressing that is. Bit of pointless trivia, and I actually thought this for a long time. The name Van Houten wasn't named after the Manson follower. Just apparently was a friend of the writer who had that last name, and he just liked the last name. So that's how Milhouse got it, Van Houten as a last name. It has nothing to do with the Manson follower at all. I thought that for the longest time. Milhouse does come from Richard Nixon's middle name. Something else I thought worth mentioning about this episode, because I was trying to, going back to what Homer was doing, picking just a random button to avert a nuclear disaster. We think about, at least I was thinking about, with decisions. We think when someone makes a decision that, especially something that's monumental, we think that there's like a lot of thought and deliberation. And no, it could be some completely random and arbitrary thing. I'll give an example. Like you and I saw that Netflix documentary, The Toys That Made Us, and they talked about the Star Wars Kenner figurines, which is like 3 3/4 inches. It's some odd number for an action figure. And the only reason that size was picked was because the guy who ran Kenner at the time, when he got the license, he went to his staff and he says, "I want the figures to be this big." And he took his thumb and his forefinger and he held it out long enough. So this was like a really big guy. And they just measured the thumb and forefinger, the distance between the two. And that's how those action figures got the size they did. I always enjoy stuff like that because it just puts in perspective when you're struggling to try to make a choice on something or a decision or try to plan for something, and you realize that not a lot of thought is put into some of these monumental things. Someone stakes a company's livelihood on, or a point of iconic fiction. Like 1984. Why is it called 1984? It was written in 1948, and Orwell just flipped the two numbers.
That's true.
I just appreciate stuff like that. I don't know if it's instinctual. I don't know if it's just you think that there's more to it than there's not. I'll conclude with this point that I liken it to you and I are big fans of the show Quantum Leap, and there's the two-parter that was done as a response to JFK, where Donald Belisario, who was the showrunner, the guy who created it, had actually served in the Marines, was in the same Marine unit with Lee Harvey Oswald. So he did this two-parter as a response to Oliver Stone's JFK. And there's a scene where Al is talking to Lee Harvey Oswald in the waiting room. And Lee Harvey Oswald is played by some guy from Sex and the City. I've seen this actor before. I just don't know his name. And he's talking about, trying to find out if Oswald did it alone and all this stuff. And, and Al brings up this conversation of that, people will think when there's a monumental event that there must be some grand scheme. This is conspiracy thinking. There cannot be, people can't just accept that it was a random event, or it was just one individual, or it was just some simple action that led to this huge change. And that there must be something more there. There can't be, it can't just be that. And people can't handle that they think there's got to be, hands on the lever. There's more people involved. It's just this grand design, and it isn't. And it really throws people for a loop. It was just something that reminded me when I was watching the episode where, Homer, does it twice. He solves two meltdowns by doing the most, idiotic thing possible.
Right. Well, two things. First of all, I remember that episode well, the Quantum Leap episode. And in fact, that one bit that you're talking about, I mean, Dean Stockwell playing Al gives this big speech, So that's the one part that I always remember. That there's that, because it's genuinely incisive. It's kind of a repudiation of conspiracy theories in general. and it's sort of saying how the reason they exist. Dean Stockwell, I'm paraphrasing,
Right.
but he basically very dramatically delivers something. Because if just one lone nut could do that, what hope is there for the rest of us? That's the concept there, that the reason that conspiracy theories exist is because we can't accept that just some lone nut could kill the president of the United States.
It's a crutch.
Right?
That's what it is.
Right. And that's one thing I remember. And then I also remember that at one point, Sam actually starts becoming Lee Harvey Oswald. And I don't remember like what happens, why that happens, but it happens because they needed a dramatic twist.
Right. I think
for suspense, it
was that and the idea that he couldn't just, he had to carry out the steps to the assassination. There was no way that fate or whatever was just going to just say, well, I'm on this day on November 22nd, I'm just going to sit here at home and do nothing. And I know this is not a Quantum Leap podcast, but I know that kind of merging happens in other episodes where Sam loses, control of himself. Quite briefly, there was another episode. I remember this one. It was set in 1979. He plays a cop, and it's basically a psychologist ordering him to kill himself. And he's, regressing to the childhood of the cop, and he's, and it's really disturbing.
That's one of my favorite episodes. That one is great. And then also there's the one called Shock Theater, which I believe is like I think it's the finale for the third season. Shock Theater, where he
relives his old characters.
Exactly, and he actually starts becoming them. Right. And so basically it's an acting showcase for Scott Bakula is what that is. It's like the two things. It lets him stretch and play some of those characters that he didn't really get to play, like actually get to play them, whether it's, the driving Miss Daisy guy, the black chauffeur or the mentally challenged person that he played in one episode, whatever it is. Right. All these it allows Scott Bakula to stretch. I think Scott Bakula is a really wonderful actor.
He is. I would agree. And I think that, I can't say what he's doing on NCIS New Orleans, but, the guy's, he can do whatever he wants. And he's quite good in, there was a show on HBO called Following, and where he plays an older gay man. And he was excellent in that. And even shows up in Soderbergh's Behind the Candelabra briefly as the guy who brings Matt Damon into Liberace's circle.
He has a fantastic porn stash in Behind the Candelabra, as I remember.
I think his character's name is Dick Black.
Yeah, something like that. And when you said Following, is that the one with Kevin Bacon?
No, that's a TV show. I think it was an HBO show. Forgot the guy's name. That I think he did a movie called The Weekend, and it was just a whole movie about two gay men. They met each other, they hooked up, and then it's just about their, dealing with each other over the period of a weekend. A British guy did it. But enough of the wonderful show that is Quantum Leap that somehow still hasn't been remade. But
we could go into a whole into a whole slew of reasons why, or problems that could potentially arise if they ever try to remake it. Still holding out hope for a reboot. There will it is also one of my favorite shows. So yeah, it's like I'm still holding out hopes for. It's
the closest you can get to an American Doctor Who, I think.
Pretty much.
Because of the situations, and you could have any story out there. But going back to what I was saying, using Quantum Leap as an example, it's just when you follow history, and then when you see that what thought is put into people when they make these monumental decisions, it can really throw you off and realize that when you may be struggling with something that you're trying to make a decision on or a move on, and that you could end up just overthinking it compared to what else went on there. It does really put in perspective, how things can go on and how things can change, and what thought or what little thought is put into it. It's just something I came to the conclusion on in watching this episode. Unrelated, I think it's Luann. Yeah, Milhouse's mom uses the term bad influence again. I'm a really young kid when I saw this episode. I didn't understand what bad influence meant, but the only reason I knew what that phrase was because I remember we had a Blockbuster video near our house, and there was a standee display for the film Bad Influence with Rob Lowe and James Spader. I just remember seeing the phrase bad influence, and I obviously was not going to watch that movie at the time. But
have you seen it since? Have you seen that movie?
I have seen it since. It is a terrible movie, and James Spader is badly miscast.
It's very entertaining, though. It's very entertaining.
hilarious, in a kind of hilarious way. The only other thing worth mentioning about that movie is the office that James Spader works in. I worked in that building for a period of time, and this is like 25 years after that movie was made. But because the place I worked at was so cheap, they never changed the look of the office at all. It was all the same. So,
Yeah, I didn't remember it taking place in L.A. For some reason, I thought it was New York, but I mean, I haven't seen that movie in a long time, so I don't remember that detail.
but yeah, I think it's Spader lives on the beach or something like that. I know it ends at a pier.
It does end at a pier, yeah.
It does.
Yeah, I remember that well.
Not unlike Falling Down, but yeah, it's a terrible movie. Want to see James Spader play a nerd? I think that's as good as you're going to get with that movie.
Well, I think that maybe one of the concepts for Bad Influence was to cast James Spader against type, to sort of be like, oh, well, he's usually the preppy douchebag, or let's make him the opposite of the character he played in Pretty in Pink. Is it Pretty in Pink or 16 Candles?
Yeah, I think it was because I've seen Pretty in Pink. I've never seen 16 Candles.
I've seen them both, and I always get them mixed up. So that's why I'm saying I don't.
I think
those
it's the one
particular
that doesn't have John Cryer. I don't think is. I could be, but again, I could be.
Pretty in Pink has John
Pretty in
Cryer.
Pink has John Cryer. I know that.
Yeah. So you're saying that James Spader is in the one that's not with John Cryer?
Again, I could be wrong. I'm likely wrong.
Which I guess is 16 Candles. Yeah, we're flying way off the rails. No, well, actually, I have a question for you, actually, with regards to what you were saying about the whole power plant thing. Now, here's something that is just blatantly unrealistic. There is a meltdown, and this is Homer's job. He's the safety inspector, or whatever it is, and he both causes the near meltdown and then is able to solve it with eeny, meeny, miny, mo. Fair enough. But here's the thing. The implication that in another scenario, like at Shelbyville, the same problem starts to happen, and Homer can do. I'm like, doesn't Shelbyville have someone on staff who is supposedly equipped to do this?
I mean, I get why they did it for a narrative purpose, to book it,
right?
It's the two incidents, but yeah, I agree with you. It's
the fact that it's a Shelbyville, because if the same scenario would happen at the Springfield plant, then it would make sense, because that is his job, except this time they happen to witness him do that. But at Shelbyville, isn't there someone that, and so it's weird, because like he's sitting there, it's like, just do what you did before. I'm like, I mean, clearly somebody here would know what to do in
and you have to assume it's like, wouldn't this also just be a completely different plant with a completely different setup? I don't think there's a one size fits all to power generation. Although, I mean, from the manual, it's that he's reading when he's freaking out. It's like, you just purchased a 1952 low yield.
But that's really absurd. And again, I'm not criticizing it. I'm not saying it's a flaw. Okay. Of course, they're doing it for narrative purposes. They're doing it for humorous purposes. It works in a humorous context. It totally works. But if you try to think about it logically for just a second, it's absolutely absurd. It makes no sense at all that this is Homer's undoing is the fact that in a totally different power plant, they happen to not have anybody equipped to do that. So if Homer hadn't shown up that day, they would have been screwed, basically, is what.
Well, not only that, if you want to take that logic, the fact is that the Springfield plant shouldn't just have one guy who has the ability to stop the meltdown. I think,
with one random button, like it's that easy.
Interestingly, it was one button that triggered the Chernobyl meltdown that we saw from the HBO miniseries. Fantastic miniseries.
Yes, wonderful
series.
What was it? Not great, not terrible. What was like the famous line from that?
Not great, not terrible. Yep. And I think it was like 3.46 Runkin or something. Which, when I saw that phrase online, I was like, "How do you pronounce that?" And I finally saw the movie. I mean, what a miniseries, written by the guy who wrote the Hangover movies, of all things.
Yes. And now he's been tapped to do The Last of Us for HBO as well. And as a fan of that game, I'm not sure what's going to happen, but we'll see. We'll see what happens.
The Stand can get released, and I mean, I don't know what your thoughts are on that, but
haven't watched it. It.
I'm sure that they'll probably do The Last of Us at some point because they need that content badly, and they'll get it done. But yeah, overall, I mean, this was a initially when I came across this episode, I thought it was going to be much more of a trifle.
Yeah.
It's like, oh, this plot, this is like something out of like a generic, typical sitcom where someone does something heroic, and they, it could be any number of sitcoms, just different settings. But you're right about the humor. Uh, interestingly, this was the first episode that had the use of the word ass twice in the show. I've seen versions of it where Bart says, bad influence my ass, and in this one he says bad influence my butt, and then they flip it with Burns, where it's like kiss my sorry ass goodbye, and then it changes depending on the cut that you see.
See, because I rewatched the episode now, and I had seen it before on DVD or whatever it is, but I used to have this episode on VHS. I taped a great part of the third season because that's back then I used to tape them every week. So I was like collecting Simpsons episodes on VHS, and I was in New York when this aired the first time, and I taped it when it aired. And I remember clearly that in the version that aired, Bart said "bad influence my ass."
And you're right to think that, because I remember watching episodes with that. I think that maybe it's a syndication thing, but yeah, again, this is something they talk about on the commentary in terms of censorship, that they had a real hard time getting that word in there.
Okay, so here's the thing though. It makes more sense. The joke, the gag, the scene actually makes more sense if it's bad influence my ass.
Right.
Because that's the whole point. I mean, the whole point is, okay, so Bart is foul-mouthed, and the point him saying bad influence my ass. He follows it up with the line, "How many times have I told you never listen to your mother?" Okay, so the whole thing is very funny. Yes, he's definitely a terrible influence. Right.
That's what makes it pretty funny.
But about that, we were talking earlier about the scene where Marge goes to visit the mom, sort of convince her to let them hang out again. At one point in that scene, and you might not remember this detail, but this has always been on my mind ever since the first time I watched the episode. And then when I revisited it, I remembered, and I said, yeah, that's right. This always was something that was on my mind. When Marge is sitting there talking to the mother, and Milhouse's mother says something, the other day, Milhouse told me my meatloaf sucks. And is it me, or does Marge roll her eyes?
I think she makes she has an expression. I don't remember exactly the expression, but
the shot's not on Marge. The shot's on Milhouse's mom.
Right.
But you sort of see like a profile view of Marge, and you get the sense that the pupil sort of goes upward.
Sucks was another word that you would not encounter on TV. I know I was told not to use that word in the house. And,
seriously? I can understand maybe your parents telling you as a kid not to say that. Sure. But as far as it not being on TV, I'm not sure. I mean, was it considered profanity?
I don't think it was considered profanity. I think it was considered something that it was kind of vulgar. I remember once getting schooled about the difference between vulgarity and profanity. I remember this, and I was like, oh yeah, it's a vulgar phrase. Yeah, I would not be allowed to use the word sucks, and I didn't get it. And then later on, I understood what was referencing. Oh, okay, now I understand maybe why my folks were uncomfortable with me using this phrase. But on the schoolyard, you just say some, because whatever was garbage, you just said it sucked, and then moved on. As well as you say, well, that blew, and then or both sucks and blows. Obviously, did we have any idea that was referencing oral? No, we did not.
It's true that it comes from a euphemism for oral sex, but if you think about it, it's like we use it to describe something bad.
Yeah.
Most people like being blown. So I mean, I don't really. Okay, Have you watched that? Speaking of, have you watched that Netflix thing, the thing about swear words?
I haven't. I wasn't really interested in it. I admit I'm a bit sore with Netflix relative recently because the way they canceled Glow. I mean, I get it.
Oh, you've decided not to support them for the time being.
No, I'm still paying my $13 a month foolishly because I can't explain why. Because it's inertia. But yeah, I know what you're talking about. I looked at the episodes. They're like 20-minute episodes, and they have one on fuck and shit and.
I watched a couple of them. I haven't watched the whole thing. It's okay. It's okay. Really, like I was expecting something better, But you sort of know that you're in trouble because even in the very first episode, which is on fuck, they keep towing the line that it's, fornication under consent of the king. So, it's not getting very, they're not, it's not, I was expecting it to really be about the history of the word, in a detailed way. But it really is just an excuse for Nicolas Cage and a bunch of other panelists, most of them comedians, to just sort of riff on the significance, the cultural significance of a given word, not really the history of it. So it has kind of the style of one of those VH1 things.
Yeah, I love the 80s where it's got like glib
Yeah,
commentary and
right.
we're going to crack a joke at the
all it
expense of
is.
this word. And
That's basically
kind of
all it
reminds me
is.
of Drunk History. I know a lot of people like that show. I never got into it.
Yeah, well, I mean, at least that one like legitimately talks about history. It's just humorous to hear people sort of mangle the events, but when they tell you, I mean, what they tell you did happen. Maybe just not in the way that they're telling you. So there's some value to that show. This one, I mean, it's a lark. I guess it's some of the riffs can be a little bit amusing, but it really, it's not that great. It seems a bit forced. Nicolas Cage is being Nicolas Cage.
Yeah, it's stunt casting, I guess.
It's
maybe he had
absolutely
more
stunt
tax
casting.
debts to pay, so he decided to do this when he's not on his 5th or 6th movie of the month.
What I will say is this about Nicolas Cage in that show: the way he's got his hair short and his beard, he looks so much like his uncle. It's unfucking believable.
Well, he's clearly dyeing that beard. Let's be real here.
Oh well, of course he is, and the hair. Assuming it's receding. It's probably real.
Well, it's been like that for like 25 years. If you go back to his Leaving Las Vegas days. But yeah, he definitely is getting the Francis Ford look going on there.
I was struck by that. It's not something that I ever really thought about until I watched this. I looked at it, was like, he looks just like Francis Ford Coppola.
Yeah, he's got that more rounded face. And I think of the only instance where I ever saw Francis Ford Coppola unshaved, well, relatively clean shaven, was in Hearts of Darkness, where he's on the beach. And he's wandering around, with his shirt off.
Not a pretty sight.
No, not at all. But he looks kind of like Gary Delabate from the Howard Stern Show. Also known as Baba Booey.
He does. His huge teeth, and like, oh yeah, you're totally right. And I know exactly the scene you're talking about. And he's sitting like on this sort of like beach chair, like waving his hands around. And this is like Irwin Allen. This is like, like he's talking about what his intentions are for the film. And he's going wildly over budget and whatever, and he's looking really insane. And he's not in great shape in that documentary. At that time, he's got this huge pot belly, like beer gut.
Yeah, and he's got some what they refer to as moobs. So
male
breasts.
He's got a pair of those. Anyway, but that's And let's stop body shaving the Coppola
Yeah, let's not
family.
do that. Let's get off that one.
Yeah. So okay. Final word on this episode, because I don't know. I think one of the reasons why we're rambling is because we don't have much to say about it. But final words on the episode. So what do you think?
I think it's a good entry point to the type of humor that we later know the golden age of The Simpsons for. I think that it's not one of the top flight episodes. I think it's like if you stratify it, it's definitely in the top quarter, because it's not a middling episode. I think it's we're starting to see more of the humor that it's known for shine through, and less of the melodrama. It's just not one of the more monumental episodes, like the episode you just did previously, where Bart gets in with the mob. That's an iconic episode. And this episode has its moments, but it's definitely not at that level. So not as bad as, say, when Homer goes to Capital City and becomes a baseball mascot, in terms of not much happens. Things do happen in this episode quite a bit, but it's not as memorable as Bart joining the mob. So that's the way I'd see it.
Yeah. More importantly, it's got good gags, good memorable gags.
And
there is
long.
enough memorable lines, enough memorable gags, genuine laughs that make it stand out from the pack. I also agree that it's probably not one of the more classic episodes. Certainly not one of the most memorable episodes that involves the plant, because there are other episodes, even in this very season, that are far, far more memorable and important to the Simpsons canon. But there are enough gags here that, yeah, this is a good one. I mean, you already start to see the series operating on a higher level of comedy. Like, they are definitely on that uptick as they enter the golden age.
And I think that can be attributed to the fact this is a freelance guy who wrote it. This wasn't someone of the main staff that put it together. So, and actually, it makes me wonder when we see other episodes written by freelancers, we see this type of thing, because these are not guys that are completely keyed in with the attitudes of the show and what the general vision of the show is. So, I know there are going to be more episodes like that, as we go further along.
I think it helps to bring in a fresh perspective, because the existing staff of writers, they were TV veterans, sitcom veterans, and comedy writing veterans. They brought their very particular sensibilities. And as the show moves into, goes through the third season, it is during the third season that I think the staff begins to change.
That's right.
I think Conan O'Brien already comes in. He's not like I'm pretty sure he already comes in the third season, maybe pitching some ideas. It's not until the fourth season that he actually starts writing, but I'm pretty sure he starts to become part of the staff in the third season.
You're right about the staffing changes, because in the season 4 DVD set, a running through line through a lot of the commentaries is that this is when the staff basically completely turns over. You don't have guys like Jay Kogan or Wallace Wolodarski. You don't have, I don't think Sam Simon's involved as much, if at all. James L. Brooks isn't really involved as much anymore. You have more comedy coming through. And then you have, periodically, I think it's maybe every 3 seasons, staff turnover and a different showrunner go through, especially I think as we get into the 4th and 5th season, where you have all those veterans of this season start splintering off and doing their own thing. We have that with Al Jean and Mike Reese, doing The Critic, and other projects from the other staff as well.
Yeah. And as for James L. Brooks, I think his sensibility really starts to get filtered out almost completely. Where you could really see his influence throughout the first 2 seasons. This starts to get filtered out heavily in season 3.
Yeah, it'll come up periodically, and we'll see that clearly in future episodes. But I completely agree with you. We're now starting to see a clean break from the melodrama of the first 2 seasons coming through in this 3rd season. And, it's like that ratio of melodrama or sweetness to humor, and you can see those ratios starting to change.
15 seconds to core meltdown.
Just do what you did before.
All right. Eeny, meeny, miny, moe, catch a tiger by the toe. If he hollers, let him go. Eeny, meeny, miny.
Crisis has been averted. Everything is super.
Thank you, Homer, for saving my plant. With that idiotic rhyming! Do you even know what button you push?
Sure, Mo.
So that's it for this week's installment of the Simpsons Countdown. Thank you for joining us. If you enjoyed this, consider showing your support. It's really very simple. Give us a like or a favorable rating. This podcast is available on Apple, Spotify, Anchor FM, and other podcasting platforms. So adding a brief review, if possible, might actually help boost the podcast's profile. And if it isn't too much trouble, please do share this with all your friends on social media. Speaking of social media, you can follow the Erix Antoine Network on Facebook or subscribe to it on YouTube. You can also follow me on Twitter at ErixAntoineNet, and feel free to find me and follow me on Letterboxd, where I frequently post film reviews you may agree or disagree with. I'm Erix Antoine. I'll be back next week when Chris Prentice and I will be discussing Like Father, Like Clown, in which we learn of Krusty's rather sad history before becoming the Springfield TV superstar he is today. And I hope you'll join us. In the meantime, stay safe out there. See you next week.
Oh, absolutely, he committed it alone. Not a doubt in the world he committed it alone. When Oliver Stone made JFK, none of that is true. Here's what happened. Because I had worked in Dallas, and I had gone to the book deposit.